Nothing we saw out there came quietly. It hit like a punch to the gut, the kind you feel before the first replay even hits the screen. What happened on that field wasn't just a bad day. It was a full-scale collapse, the kind that exposes every crack this team has been trying to cover up for weeks. The Eagles didn't just lose to the Bears on Black Friday. They were dominated from the opening snap to the final whistle. And once again, that familiar feeling from 2023 crept back in, like the same script being replayed right in front of us. And that's exactly why this video exists. Because today, we're going deep. We're talking about the team's moment, the weight of its history, the mistakes that keep coming back, and most importantly, what needs to change right now for this team to start flying high again. So lock in, strap on your helmet, and get ready. Today's content starts with full energy. And before we go any further, make sure to hit that like button. It helps the channel a ton and ensures you never miss an Eagles breakdown. Because let's be honest, this score does not reflect what actually happened. Those 15 points are decorative, empty calories, window dressing for an offense that looked lifeless for most of the afternoon. Dreadful, anemic, predictable. The same issues, no rhythm, no creativity, no identity, showed up again. And the longer it goes on, the more it becomes clear that whatever this offense is trying to be, it simply isn't working. The Bears weren't confused. They weren't reacting late. They weren't scrambling. They were reading everything in real time because everything the Eagles ran was exactly what they expected. And when a defense knows what's coming, you can feel it in every snap. But what really stung, what really made this one feel different, was how thoroughly Chicago dominated on the ground. This wasn't just a bad day stopping the run, it was historic. They gashed the Eagles for 281 rushing yards, their best single-game total since 1985. Kyle Monangai bulldozed through with 130 yards. DeAndre Swift, back in the city where everyone knows his name, added 125 more. Every carry looked like the last. Untouched lanes, broken tackles, the Bears marching down the field like they were running a practice script against air. And the truth is simple. When one team can run the ball at will and the other can't get anything going, the result isn't a surprise. It's inevitable. Caleb Williams barely had to throw. He didn't need to. When your opponent controls the clock for nearly 40 minutes, you don't have to be spectacular, you just have to avoid mistakes. Meanwhile, the Eagles spent most of their possessions looking like they were searching for something that wasn't there. Jalen Hurts has been fighting it week after week, and today it showed again. Inaccurate balls, slow reads, passes that didn't cut through the cold the way Williams did. And that's part of the story too. You could see the difference in arm strength in the wind. You could see the hesitation. You could feel the offense shrinking instead of responding. And here's the part no one wants to hear but everyone already knows. This team is slipping. At 8-4, the season is starting to feel like it's pulling apart at the seams. The momentum is gone. The confidence is cracked. The issues are piling up. And unless something drastic changes, it's hard to see how this group suddenly flips a switch and becomes a team capable of making a serious run. Because what we're watching isn't one bad stretch. It's a pattern. It's a trend. It's an offense that has looked out of sync for most of the season and a defense that is now worn down from carrying too much of a load. And that brings us to the elephant in the room, the coaching, the play calling, the offensive structure that feels like it came out of another decade. Kevin Patullo isn't getting it done. Nick Sirianni's fingerprints are on this offense too, and the stubbornness to stick with a system that is clearly failing is putting the entire season at risk. When you have an offense this predictable, this vanilla, this lacking in complementary concepts, something has to change. Not at the end of the season, not later, but now. Because if it doesn't, this slide doesn't stop. And you can feel the tension growing. You can feel the conversations that are happening behind closed doors. The owner in the booth looking frustrated. The stadium emptying out early. The fan base reaching its breaking point. Everyone sees the same thing. Everyone recognizes the same warning signs. The question is whether the people inside the building are willing to act before it's too late. So looking at all of that, the run defense collapsing, the offense stuck in neutral, Hurts struggling, the staff refusing to adjust, and the Cowboys rising fast in the rearview mirror, you have to ask, are we watching the early stages of a turnaround, or the moment the season officially slips out of the Eagles' hands? What do you think, fans? Where does this team go from here? Then you look at the turning point, the exact moment when whatever hope still existed evaporated, and it becomes even more painful because it was right there for the taking. The score is 10-9. J.X. Hunt gifts the Eagles the momentum swing they desperately needed with a clean interception on Caleb Williams, setting the offense up in plus territory. It felt like the moment the team could finally flip the script, punch back, and reclaim control. But instead of capitalizing, the offense once again unraveled in the most deflating way possible. Jalen Hurts lines up for the tush push, a play that once felt automatic, and gets stripped. just ripped right out of his hands by Nan Wright, who has produced more turnovers this season than anyone else in the league. And what's worse is how predictable the disaster felt. When your interior offensive line can't generate movement anymore, that play loses its magic. Today, it became a liability. Then the Bears marched down the field on a soul-crushing 12-play, 87-yard drive that took nearly 9 minutes off the clock. You could feel every second draining away, the energy in the stadium evaporating, the frustration boiling over. It wasn't just a scoring drive, it was a message. Chicago dictated everything, and the Eagles simply had no answer. From that moment forward, it never really felt like Philadelphia had a realistic path back into the game. And as someone who's watched every snap of this season, I can tell you that feeling, that sense of inevitability, has become far too common. Hurts is struggling in a way that can't be ignored anymore. Missed throws, slow processing, balls that die in the wind, moments where he looks disconnected from the rhythm of the offense. And while everyone knows he's had a carousel of offensive coordinators over the years, the harsh truth is this: right now, he's hurting the team more than he's helping it. The days of explosive, unpredictable offensive football feel distant. Every drive feels like a battle against the structure of the offense itself. The unit moves without flow, without creativity, without any sense that it's building towards something. And that falls on the coaching. It falls on the scheme. It falls on the refusal to adapt. Nick Sirianni is boxed into a corner. Keeping Kevin Patullo in charge of this offense is doing nothing but accelerating the downward spiral, and the organization knows it. A decision has to be made. It's either inject new life into the offense by shaking up the play calling, or accept the direction this season is heading. Because the defense, as tough as it's played at times, is showing the wear and tear of carrying the load week after week. You can only ask a unit to hold the line for so long when the other side of the ball keeps putting them in impossible situations. And even then, they're still surrendering explosive plays and struggling to stop the run, which makes the entire equation even tougher. When you zoom out, the picture becomes clear. The Eagles are 4-4 over their last 8 games, and none of that feels like the resume of a team preparing to peak at the right time. It feels like a team fighting to stay afloat, searching for answers that aren't coming from the current structure. And while the schedule still leaves possibilities, Chargers, Raiders, Washington twice, Bills, none of those games are freebies, not with the current state of this offense. If nothing changes, the trajectory doesn't magically turn upward. It continues exactly as it's been trending. But here's where I want to turn it over to you, the fans watching this, because you're living this frustration too. After everything you've seen, every warning sign, every stalled drive, every missed opportunity, do you still believe this team can right the ship if they make the necessary changes? Or are we watching a season slip away in real time? I want to know what you think. Drop your thoughts in the comments. And when you really break down what's been happening over these last several weeks, it becomes impossible to ignore the pattern that keeps repeating itself. The Eagles start fast in brief stretches, show flashes of who they can be, and then fall right back into the same crippling habits that undo all the progress. It happened against Dallas, where a 21-0 lead evaporated into 41 straight unanswered points. It happened today, where a rare momentum swing was followed immediately by a turnover that flipped the game right back to Chicago. The inconsistency isn't random. It's the symptom of a team with no offensive identity and no in-game adjustments that actually solve problems. And that's what separates great coaching from desperate coaching. Look across the field at what Ben Johnson is doing with Chicago. Layered concepts, motion, misdirection, setups that build on each other throughout the game. His offense manipulates defenses. It forces mistakes. It creates leverage in space. Meanwhile, the Eagles run the same looks, the same timing, the same predictable alignments. There's no disguise, no sequencing, no complementary structure. It's static football in a league built on constant adaptation, and that makes everything harder for the players on the field, especially a quarterback trying to play through his own struggles. Jalen Hurts is pressing on every dropback. You can see it in his footwork, in the hesitations, in the late reads that allow defenders to close windows that should be open. He's second-guessing because the design isn't giving him answers. And the longer this goes on, the worse it gets. Quarterbacks need rhythm, clarity, purpose within the play. He's getting none of that. And yet even with all that working against him, the turnovers are stacking up at the worst possible moments. Those mistakes aren't just costly, they're deflating, especially for a defense that's fighting fatigue and getting pushed to the breaking point, because that defense, once the strength of the team, is starting to show real cracks. They're on the field too long. They're worn down by constant short fields. They're getting gashed by the run because they don't have time to recover mentally or physically between possessions. And when a team can't stop the run early, when lanes are wide open from the first drive, it's a sign not just of fatigue, but of a unit losing its edge, its discipline, its communication. Even with all their talent and youth, They can't hold up forever under this much pressure. And as all of this is happening, the standings are shifting fast. The Cowboys are surging, the Rams are climbing, and suddenly the Eagles have gone from the number 1 seed to the number 3 seed in just 5 days. What once looked like a march toward another playoff run now feels like a scramble just to keep pace in a crowded NFC. It's stunning how quickly things turned, and even more stunning how familiar it all feels. For those who lived through the 2023 collapse, this is déjà vu in high definition. So now the Eagles face a stretch of games that will define everything. Chargers, Raiders, Washington twice, Buffalo, some winnable, some dangerous, all crucial. But none of them will matter if this coaching staff refuses to take decisive action. And that brings us back to the crossroads Nick Sirianni now stands at. He can protect his friend, keep the staff intact, and watch the season continue to fracture. Or he can make the kind of tough, necessary decision that leaders make when everything is on the line. A change in play calling won't fix everything, but it's the only lever left to pull that offers any real chance at a turnaround. So here we are, Bird Gang, looking straight at the question this entire season now hinges on. With the offense broken, the defense exhausted, and the division slipping away, what happens next? Does Sirianni finally shake up the structure and inject the spark this team desperately needs? Or does he ride this version of the offense into the ground? And as we move deeper into the fallout of this loss, the reality becomes even clearer. This isn't about one game, or one bad performance, or one cold afternoon in Chicago. This is about a team whose issues have been accumulating layer by layer, week after week, until everything finally collapsed under its own weight. You can almost trace the progression, the early season warning signs that were brushed aside because the team kept winning, the moments of miscommunication that were chalked up to timing, the stretches of stagnant offense that were disguised by fourth-quarter comebacks or individual talent taking over. But now that the results have caught up with the performance, every flaw stands under a spotlight. And maybe that's what's so hard for fans to swallow, because when you look back at where this team was just a few weeks ago, controlling the NFC, setting themselves up for another postseason push, everything felt aligned for another run. But suddenly that confidence has been replaced with hesitation. That momentum has turned into frustration. And the Eagles, once feared for their physicality and identity, now look like they're questioning themselves in real time. They look uncertain. They look disconnected. And that's not something you fix with one good week or one strong practice. That's something that requires leadership willing to confront uncomfortable truths. The most uncomfortable truth of all is that this offense does not scare anyone right now. Defensive coordinators aren't sweating during prep. They aren't confused on game day. They aren't being forced into mistakes. They're sitting back, reading everything with ease, and attacking the weaknesses that haven't been addressed all season. There's no illusion of complexity. There's no disguised intent. There's no sequencing that forces a defense to pause or hesitate. It's straight-line football, and in today's NFL, that's a losing formula. And yes, this shines a light directly on the coaching, because players can execute perfectly, but if the design is predictable, the ceiling will always be low. Meanwhile, you can see the defensive fatigue in every series. They start strong, they play disciplined snaps early, but by the second half the cracks begin to show. Missed gaps, slow pursuit, fewer bodies swarming to the ball. And that's not because they suddenly became a bad defense, it's because they're being asked to shoulder the load of an offense that repeatedly sends them back onto the field without rest or support. Even the best units will break under that kind of stress. Even the most talented young cores will lose their edge if they're asked to bail out the same problems every single week. And all of this now converges into a moment the franchise cannot ignore. The locker room feels the weight, the fan base feels it even more. And upstairs, you can bet Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman feel it too. These aren't just on-field problems, they're organizational pressure points. When a season starts slipping, tough decisions follow. And right now, the Eagles have reached the place where indecision is just another form of decline. Because staying the course won't reverse the trend. Hoping for improvement won't generate rhythm. And treating this like a minor slump won't fix what is clearly a structural problem. The schedule ahead may look manageable on paper, but nothing is manageable for a team whose offensive foundation is this unstable. Until the philosophy changes, the results won't. So now everything turns to the next step, the response, the adjustment, the willingness to act before the window tightens even further. Fans can sense that this moment matters. Players can sense it. The entire league can sense it. And the only question that remains is whether the Eagles are prepared to do what's necessary, even if it means shaking the very structure of how they operate. And this brings us to the crossroads the Eagles can no longer avoid. Do they make the difficult decision that could reignite their season? And as we step into what might be the defining stretch of this season, you can almost feel the urgency pulsing through every conversation around this team. Because now it's not just about correcting mistakes, it's about confronting the core identity of a roster that was built to contend. not collapse. This isn't a rebuilding year. This isn't a transitional roster. This is a group crafted to win now, with veterans playing meaningful snaps, young talent entering their prime, and expectations that were sky high for a reason. And when expectations meet reality in this kind of violent collision, something has to give. You walk through the facility right now and you imagine the conversations happening behind closed doors. The film sessions where players sit with their heads down, rewinding the same missed fits and stalled drives. The offensive meetings where frustration has probably reached a boiling point. The defensive room where guys know they can only carry the burden for so long. And above all, you think about the coaching offices, where every decision over the next week could shape the direction of the entire season. Because at this point, it's about more than just Monday night against the Chargers. It's about whether the Eagles can stop the bleeding before it becomes fatal. The truth is, this team can still turn things around. They have the talent. They have the experience. They have leaders who have been through adversity before. But none of that matters unless the structure supporting them changes. Players can't play free in an offense that gives them nothing but static looks and recycled concepts. A quarterback can't process confidently when the scheme creates more questions than answers. A defense can't dominate when they're forced to defend 80 snaps a game. Every level of this team is being stressed by the same source, an offensive philosophy that hasn't adapted while the rest of the league has passed it by. And if we can all see it from the outside, you know the players feel it even more on the inside. They're competitors. They want to fight. They want to respond. But even the strongest competitor needs a system that elevates them instead of boxing them in. The longer this goes on, the more the frustration grows, and the harder it becomes to rebuild trust between the locker room and the coaching staff. That's why this moment matters so much. Not just to save the season, but to preserve the belief that the structure around them is capable of leading them where they want to go. Because once belief breaks, everything else follows. So here we are, Bird Gang, on the edge of clarity or collapse. The decisions made in the next few days will determine which direction this team goes. The question is no longer whether the Eagles need to change something. The question is whether they have the courage to do it when it matters most. Before I close this out, I want to hear from you. Do you think the Eagles have the leadership and the guts to make the kind of internal move that could save this season? Or are we watching a repeat of a collapse that started long before anyone was willing to admit it?